It's time for Security Now. Steve Gibson is here with lots to talk about, including supply chain security, end-to-end encryption. It's coming to a Thunderbird. I'm very excited about that. And they finally cracked Ken Thompson's Unix password. It's all coming up next on Security Now.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 736, recorded Tuesday, October 15th, 2019. Checkmate. Security Now is brought to you by Beacon from EchoSec. Beacon is the fastest way to discover critical data online. This web-based platform gathers millions of posts from dark websites, paste sites, and discussion forums, and that means you can detect threats to your organization quickly. Book a demo today and claim a 10% discount by visiting echosec.net/securitynow. And by IT Pro TV. IT Pro TV provides IT training that's effective and entertaining with access to virtual labs and practice tests. Visit go.itpro.tv/securitynow for an additional 30% off the lifetime of your active subscription. Use the code SN30 at checkout. And by Thinkst Canary. Detect attackers on your network with honeypots that can be deployed in minutes. For 10% off and a 60-day money-back guarantee, go to canary.tools/twit and enter the code TWIT in the How Did You Hear About Us box. It's time for Security Now, the show where Steve Gibson saves us. Basically, we're gonna change all the promotional copy to just Steve Gibson saves us all. That's all we need to say.
Or sometimes worries us, sometimes
scares the hell out of us, and then saves us.
That's right.
Goes hand in hand. Hey, Steve, how are you?
Great, and great to be with you for episode 736 for the middle of October. Something really interesting has happened that I wanted to put into context because there's been some invariably is what I was looking for. Invariably, some confusion about
inevitably.
There you
go.
What is probably going to be a significant event for the industry because a security researcher / hacker found a flaw in all Apple iOS boot ROMs from the A5 through the A11, which is like from the iPhone 4S to up and including the iPhone X, which I have, not the next generation, the X, whatever they are, the XS,
12 and 13, the A12 and A13,
yeah. So not the A12 and 13 Bionics, but up through the A11. What's significant about this is that it cannot be fixed because it is in the boot ROM, which is by definition it's the ROM but it's burned in at the factory. And anyway, so the exploit was called Checkmate, CheckM and then numeral 8, which is what we're going to talk about as our main topic at the end of the podcast. And our listeners who are sick and tired of hearing about ransomware will be glad that except for that, I will never mention the word during this podcast because there's a lot of other stuff to talk about. We have a rather sobering supply chain proof of concept attack, and I want to take a minute to use that to talk about supply chain attacks because although we've had some false reporting, they are real. We also have an update on the ongoing encryption debate, a fun blast from the past password decryption that you probably already know about. Anyway, we will make sure all of our listeners do. An intriguing security and privacy consequence of today's high-resolution consumer cameras. The not very surprising but interesting to have numbers, sad state of affairs with the knowledge of security in American consumers, A nice piece of news about OpenPGP. You've always been, Leo, a long PGP booster, and a mainstream email client is going to get OpenPGP built in natively.
Oh, that's great news. That's awesome.
Yes, yes. Also, Windows Defender gets tamper protection. Squirrel gets a very nice mention by Google's cloud security architects. We've got a bit of sci-fi, and fun miscellany, and then we're going to finish by talking about what it means to end users, what it means to the security industry, the fact that essentially any earlier device, many necessarily still supported by Apple, are now jailbreakable and there's nothing Apple can do. And that's got big consequences. So
Checkmate.
I think another great, Checkmate.
Checkmate.
Well named.
Well named.
Yeah. Another great podcast for our listeners.
I'm excited. Are you going to talk about the Sudo Flaw, the Sudo Flaw?
I meant to. It was in my notes, and I didn't.
Okay.
So,
because I don't know if it's something of real concern. My suspicion is it's not. But every Linux is updating. Sudo is used to escalate your non-privileged account to a super user. And it's a great bug because if you use the user -1, it just authenticates without a password, and suddenly you're super user. And of course, that you know exactly what happened. When you hear -1, you go, oh, okay.
Wow.
It's a buffer overflow.
Yeah. Wow.
Mm-hmm. So, because SUDO is on everything, including all Macs, as well as all Linux computers, it's only Windows that wouldn't be affected by this. So,
yeah. In fact, I have to use it, and I do when I'm playing with my Drobos, because the normal user account is not privileged, and so you have to elevate yourself in order to do stuff with the file system.
Yeah. It's probably not going to affect anybody, but nevertheless, everybody is updating right now. So that's something to be aware of. But we'll take a break and we'll come back, and I want to hear all the story that you've got about this flaw in iOS, because God knows we're all using it. First, a word from our sponsor. We have such good sponsors on Security Now. And EchoSec is a brand new one I want to welcome. I was talking to the EchoSec folks. By the way, really nice people up in Canada. And actually, this comes out of, as a lot of great security stuff does, university research. EchoSec's Beacon is the technology I want to tell you about. And EchoSec's been around for a long time as a discovery tool for companies that are thinking about their social media presence, for law enforcement, trying to keep an eye on threats. You'll actually love this, Steve, because Beacon is essentially a way to search the dark net across all the stuff that Google doesn't give you for things like leaked personally identifiable information, fraudulent credit cards, data breaches, and as you know, hackers love to boast. And they often do it on dark message boards. They do it on dark chats. And if law enforcement could just be scanning for this kind of stuff, it'd be a lot easier to catch them. That's what Beacon does. It allows anyone on your team to scan for threats across onion sites, paste sites, message boards. You don't need a Tor browser. It's very easy to use. It's very sophisticated, but you don't need a lot of training to use it. It parses the data before it delivers it to you, so you don't have to worry about seeing stuff you shouldn't see, or image content that you don't want to see. It looks for digital threats, not just data breaches, but physical threats. This is another, it's sad that we have to live in this world, but we do. And there are people out there who are threatening people physically. They are threatening mass shootings, things like this. Often, as we know, in hindsight, this stuff is discussed online before it happens. Beacon lets you see that. So if you're in law enforcement or physical security, I know you're already spending time looking through digital channels, trying to stay ahead of risks. you need Beacon. As a security professional, you need to detect this information quickly so you can respond effectively and stop these threats before they happen. Inform your stakeholders. Keep everybody safe. That's what this is all about. These guys are so cool. They're up in Victoria, BC. A great group doing some really interesting work. And I think, frankly, really necessary work. Don't be left in the dark. If you're in security, if you're in law enforcement, if you're protecting your company, you can discover key data from hidden sources before they impact your organization. You can book a demo, and I really suggest you do this. When they gave me the demo, I was blown away. Go to echosec.net/securitynow, and you'll get a 10% discount by doing that as well. ECHO, Echo, Sec, S-E-C, echosec.net/securitynow, 10% discount. Get a demo. This is incredibly valuable information. I think a lot of law enforcement people think if I could just see into this dark area, if I could just know what's going on ahead of time, I could save lives. And that's exactly what this does. So we're really happy to have these guys on the show. This is the first time in there. They've been advertising. echosec.net/securitynow. Check out Beacon and get a 10% discount. All right. Thank you, Mr. Steve.
So I titled this A Sobering Reminder About Supply Chain Attacks. They're not common, and no, they won't be employed by random 400-pound antisocial hackers living in their mom's basements. But anyone who completely discounts them and imagines that they are impossible is fooling themselves. Andy Greenberg, writing for Wired magazine, reintroduced the idea by reminding us. He wrote, "More than a year has passed since Bloomberg Businessweek grabbed the lapels of the cybersecurity world with a bombshell claim, as we covered at the time and as we well know and watched then being debunked, that Supermicro motherboards in servers used by major tech firms, including Apple and Amazon, had been stealthily implanted with a chip the size of a grain of rice that allowed Chinese hackers to spy deep into those networks. Apple, Amazon, and Supermicro all vehemently denied the report. The NSA dismissed it as a false alarm. The DEF CON Hacker Conference awarded it 2 pony points for, quote, the most overhyped bug and the most epic fail. And no follow-up reporting has yet confirmed its central premise.
However, it's not been debunked either.
Exactly. And what captivated me, as our listeners may remember at the time, was the total feasibility of it. I mean, there was like, yes, this could happen. I mean, and the fact that it was a false positive report this time doesn't mean that it's never going to happen. So, and actually that was sort of the impetus for an event that will be occurring next week during in Stockholm, Sweden, during and there's no way to say this, it's CS3 STHLM.
Yeah. Yeah, baby.
Yeah, rolls right off the tip of the tongue. It's a security conference which bills itself as the premier cybersecurity conference for the ICS, SCADA, and critical infrastructure world.
I'm guessing they probably call it CS3 Stockholm, but
I bet that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So during that conference, security researcher Monta Elkins, who works as the self-described hacker-in-chief for the industrial control security firm FoxGuard, will be showing off his handiwork. He will be next week vividly demonstrating just how easily spies, criminals, saboteurs, with even minimal skills. I mean, literally, the guy in his mother's basement could do this if he were motivated to and had, some technical background, working on a shoestring budget, can implant a chip in enterprise IT equipment to create a stealthy backdoor for themselves. So in this instance, Elkin, armed with a $150 hot air desoldering tool, a $40 microscope, and some $2 chips ordered online, and you're showing it now. This is the picture of the week for the podcast, Leo. That little red circle in the lower left is the chip he added, the $2 chip he added to a Cisco ASA 5505 firewall appliance.
So this is a small board by itself. It's kind of hard to tell the scale, but this is
to get a scale for it. Yes.
Yeah, it's just a few inches across.
Yeah, maybe
Probably.
8 inches.
Okay.
Sort of like a kind of 8 by 8.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Andy Greenberg interviewed Elkins, who said, "We think this stuff is so magical, but it's not really that hard. By showing people the hardware, I wanted to make it much more real for them." He says, "It's not magical. It's not impossible." He says, "I could do this in my basement. And there are lots of people," he says, "smarter than me that can do it for almost nothing." So what he did was he used the AT-Tiny 85 chip, which is about 5 millimeters on a side. It's got 4 tiny mounting and connecting pins on opposite sides from each other. He pulled the chip from a $2 DigiSpark Arduino board. He says it's not quite the size of a grain of rice, but it's tiny. After writing his code into that chip, he desoldered it from the DigiSpark board and soldered it to the motherboard of that Cisco ASA 5505 firewall appliance. He found an inconspicuous spot that required no extra wires, which could give the chip access to power and the firewall's serial port. And as I mentioned, our picture of the week shows it. I have a larger version of it on the neck, a couple pages down. He noted that he could have used an even smaller chip, but chose the AT-Tiny 85 because it was easier to program. He says he also could have hidden his malicious chip even more subtly inside one of several radio frequency shielded cans on the board.
I mean, if you looked at the motherboard, you would see this.
Yeah, but look it around. I mean, unless it was circled, we wouldn't know.
Yeah. Good point.
You know, it looks like all the other ones.
It looks a little bit hand soldered.
There's a little lumpiness. Yeah. It's a little lumpy. Yeah.
But still.
Anyway, so, and he deliberately wanted to be able to show, hold the board up at the security conference, he says, in order to point to it and say, here it is. So what does this tiny itty bitty chip do? Elkins programmed his tiny stowaway to carry out an attack as soon as the firewall boots in a target's data center. It impersonates a local security administrator who would access the firewall's configuration by connecting their computer directly to the firewall's hardware admin port. So at boot, the chip triggers the firewall's password recovery feature to create a new admin account for itself, which then allows subsequent full remote admin access to the firewall's configuration by a remote attacker. He noted that he chose the Cisco's ASA 5505 firewall for his demo because it was the cheapest one he found on eBay. But he noted that any Cisco firewall that offers that sort of recovery in the case of a lost password, and they all do, they presume if you're able to attach a serial cable to the serial port of your computer to the firewall, well, then, you're God of that device. You are physically proximate to the device, and you're able to implement serial commands, not internet port-based commands. So he also noted that with a bit more reverse engineering, it would also be possible to reprogram the firmware of the firewall to make it into a more full-featured foothold for spying on the victim's network, though he didn't go, to any trouble of that sort for his simple proof of concept. So I like this story because I wanted to highlight the triviality of this proof of concept for our listeners. For non-hardware types, this sort of thing might seem like exotic sci-fi, but in today's world, it really isn't. It is extremely possible to hide this sort of thing in plain sight. Think of it like what's happened with today's operating systems. The graybeards among us, you and I, Leo, and probably half of our listeners, probably fondly recall those days of yesteryear when we knew and could identify every file on our 10 megabyte hard drive of our PC. Back then we knew that the 5 files that MS-DOS was using, and when you installed a piece of code, you installed its executable, and then like an ini or a config file or something. I mean, we knew exactly what was going on, and we sort of thought of it as like that's the way it's supposed to be. Well, needless to say, those days are long gone. Now we have no idea what the heck is loaded on our multi-gig, if not multi-terabyte drives. And if you look at the process monitor, you don't even know what is running on those machines. It's just full of stuff. So talk about hiding in plain sight. Similarly, looking at any modern motherboard or a security appliance like that firewall, and we saw the picture of it in the picture of the week, we see a literal sea of tiny chips. Well, we have no way of knowing whether they are from the factory or not, especially if they are cleanly and carefully added. And again, I'm not wearing a tinfoil beanie here. I know that this likely doesn't affect any of us and never will. But what the lesson we keep learning, the thing we keep seeing is that what can be done is done. And we know that cyber espionage is today a real thing. And for a nation-state scale actor, intercepting the physical shipment of a device is not difficult. And the payoff from implanting an undetectable hardware backdoor could be significant. And of course, that's why the Bloomberg piece a year ago generated so much fervor, is that no one discounted what it would mean if that was actually happening. If there was, somebody had successfully planted a spy chip in a huge number of devices. Well, for a nation state actor, it doesn't have to be a huge number. You're not shooting a shotgun. You're targeting with a sniper scope. And so intercepting just one device bound for a destination that matters is theoretically all you need to do. So anyway, so I thought about it. If I was really, really worried and had to be safe, what would I do? Well, one possibility for someone who's really concerned would be to ask a favor of a completely unaffiliated company to purchase the hardware that you want on your behalf, and then pick it up from them. In other words, avoid the possibility of anybody monitoring the purchases that you're making and intercepting the hardware. And of course, another possibility is to note that virtually all of these turnkey appliances are typically just offering pre-packaged solutions. Anything they can do can probably be done just by gluing some off-the-shelf open source Linux or Unix apps together in any generic server PC. For example, Linux and Unix firewalls today are extremely capable. You could roll your own to do anything that you might purchase an off-the-shelf appliance to do. So, there are ways to work around this problem if it was really something you were worried about. I just sort of wanted to take this opportunity, the opportunity of this guy making this presentation next week, so easily making a modification he didn't have engineering plans. He didn't have schematics. He did a bit of reverse engineering of the Cisco device in order to find the place to put the chip. But, if he can do it, so can anybody else who is motivated. It's just not that difficult. And in Andy Greenberg's piece in Wired, he also mentioned something that we didn't cover, which is to prove the point that the Bloomberg report could have been true. Somebody did make that change to a super micro motherboard subsequently, just to demonstrate that it could be done. So, and it was at I can't remember the security conference now where it was shown, but that was subsequently shown. It was at the Chaos Computing Conference subsequently, where he said, okay, so nobody found a super micro motherboard with that done, but he says, he held it up. He says, I'm holding one where I did exactly what the report alleged, just for the sake of saying it's possible. So the point is, it is possible. Again, it's not going to affect the majority of us, but I guess for some agencies, hopefully they are taking some sorts of measures to protect themselves from this kind of supply chain problem, because they are possible.
But they'd be targeted mostly, right? I mean, you're not going to do you're not going to say, I'm going to take every, well, I guess you could if you were the manufacturer, take every Linksys router and mess with it. Much more likely, you'd interrupt a shipment of an important piece of gear, a server, say, to the Pentagon. You'd sneak in that's why they call it supply chain. You'd sneak in the middle, put something on it, and let it go on. That's much more likely. Yeah.
Right. And
it's not something you and I should worry about.
No, exactly. Our listeners probably have no need to worry about it, but I would imagine, I just sort of wanted to just revisit the issue that kind of attack is targetable and imminently feasible.
Absolutely.
Even though a year ago it was debunked.
It's almost certainly happening. We know the NSA has done it.
Yes, exactly.
So it's not a proof of concept. It is a concept. It's happening.
Yeah, it's a demonstration.
Yes, exactly.
So last March 6th, Mark Zuckerberg famously posted his so-called, what was titled, a privacy-focused vision for social networking. And I snipped out from a very long thing. The sort of the salient piece of what he said was, he said, I believe the future of communication will increasingly shift to private encrypted services where people can be confident what they say to each other stays secure and their messages and content won't stick around forever. He says, this is the future I hope we will help bring about. And of course, yes, it was met with a lot of skepticism, and we talked about it at the time. And I know you did multiple podcasts of used it for content on multiple podcasts because it was an interesting statement coming from Facebook. He said, we plan to build this the way we've developed WhatsApp. And of course, he didn't. They acquired WhatsApp, right? But he said, and doesn't WhatsApp use Signal as its core
does.
protocol?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so of course he was leveraging Moxie Marlinspike's tremendous work that we've talked about in detail at the time. He said, focus on the most fundamental and private use case messaging, make it as secure as possible, and then build more ways for people to interact on top of that, including calls, video chats, groups, stories, businesses, payments, commerce, and ultimately a platform for many other kinds of private services. So all that sounds good if they actually execute. And his posting was much longer, and it covers many other points. But basically, the entire thing was a manifesto for privacy and unbreakable by anyone encryption. Well, predictably, in our current environment where this whole question of government and law enforcement legal access to any and all private communications remains very much up in the air and unsettled, several governments have now formally pushed back against Facebook's declared intentions. In a 2.5-page open letter dated October 4th, so about a week and a half ago, which was co-signed by law enforcement authorities in the US, the UK, and Australia, Facebook is strongly urged to halt its plans for stronger end-to-end encryption. And I won't bore our listeners with the entire letter, but I will just share the beginning of it to get a sense for it. It was addressed as an open letter. Dear Mr. Zuckerberg, open letter, Facebook's privacy first proposals. And so the US, the UK, and Australia write, we are writing to request that Facebook does not proceed with its plan to implement end-to-end encryption across its messaging services without ensuring that there is no reduction, I love the way they phrase this, no reduction to user safety, and without including a means for lawful access to the content of communications to protect our citizens. In your post of 6 March 2019, quote, a privacy-focused vision for social networking, unquote, you acknowledged that, quote, there are real safety concerns to address before we can implement end-to-end encryption across all our messaging services, unquote. You stated that, quote, we have a responsibility to work with law enforcement and to help prevent, unquote, and he says the use of Facebook for things like child sexual exploitation, terrorism, and extortion. They write, we welcome this commitment to consultation. As you know, our governments have engaged with Facebook on this issue, and some of us have written to you to express our views. Unfortunately, Facebook has not committed to address our serious concerns about the impact its proposals could have on protecting our most vulnerable citizens. And so that's where they go with this, is basically child sexual abuse. They said we support.
They always do. That's where they go. Think of the children.
I know. He says we support strong encryption, which is used by billions of people every day for services such as banking, commerce, and communications. We also respect promises made by technology companies to protect users' data. And we'll just stop for a second and note that, yes, as far as we know, there's no technology in place that allows the government to intercept our HTTPS connections during banking and commerce and communications, as far as we know.
As far as we know,
and but we do know because we know how the system works,
the math works,
and that there are no back doors in TLS at the moment.
Although we also probably know that they're collecting everything as much as they can. They built that big server farm so that they can collect more data and then hope that they can crack it down the road, I guess. Does TLS support perfect forward secrecy?
It does.
Oh,
yes.
So
TLS.
good luck, NSA.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You cannot do retrospective decryption once you obtain the key of the server in the future. So then they say law-abiding citizens have a legitimate expectation that their privacy will be protected. However, as your March blog post recognized, we must ensure that technology companies protect their users and others affected by their users' online activities. Security enhancements to the virtual world should not make us more vulnerable in the physical world. We must find a way to balance the need to secure data with public safety and the need for law enforcement to access the information they need to safeguard the public, investigate crimes, and prevent future criminal activity. You know, I mean, even as I'm reading this, I mean, it is self-contradictory, right? I mean, they're contradicting themselves in what they're saying they want. So they continue, not doing so hinders our law enforcement agencies' ability to stop criminals and abusers in their tracks. And I'll just read one more paragraph here because this is important. Companies should not deliberately design their systems to preclude any form of access to content, even for preventing or investigating the most serious crimes. This puts our citizens and societies at risk by severely eroding a company's ability to detect and respond to illegal content and activity, such as child sexual exploitation and abuse, terrorism, and foreign adversaries' attempts to undermine democratic values and institutions. Oh, yeah, let's go there, too.
They hit the big three on that one.
Let's go there, too. Yeah. Preventing the prosecution of offenders and safeguarding of victims. It also impedes law enforcement's ability to investigate these and other serious crimes. Risks to public safety from Facebook's proposals are exacerbated in the context of a single platform that would combine inaccessible messaging services with open profiles, providing unique routes for prospective offenders to identify and groom our children, is what they wrote. So it then congratulates Facebook on the number of child sexual abuse cases they helped law enforcement with, and details one particularly poignant case involving an 11-year-old, which I'm not going to go into. It concludes saying, equally important to Facebook's own work to act against illegal activity, law enforcement rely on obtaining the content of communications under appropriate legal authorization to save lives, to enable criminals to be brought to justice and exonerate the innocent. We therefore call on Facebook and other companies to take the following steps, and we have 4 bullet points. Embed the safety of the public in systems designs, thereby enabling you to continue to act against illegal content effectively with no reduction to safety, and facilitating the prosecution of offenders and safeguarding of victims. 2, enable law enforcement to obtain lawful access to content in a readable and usable format. 3, engage in consultation with governments to facilitate this in a way that is substantive and genuinely influences your design decisions. And 4, not implement the proposed changes until you can ensure that the systems you would apply to maintain the safety of your users are fully tested and operational. I'm not sure what that 4th one is about. Then they conclude, we are committed to working with you to focus on reasonable proposals that will allow Facebook and our governments to protect your users and the public while protecting their privacy. Our technical experts, they're writing, are confident that we can do so while defending cybersecurity and supporting technological innovation. We will take an open and balanced approach in line with the joint statement of principles signed by the governments of the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. So as we know, that's the Five Eyes, in August of 2018, and the subsequent communique agreed in July this year. As you have recognized, it is critical to get this right for the future of the Internet. Children's safety and law enforcement's ability to bring criminals to justice must not be the ultimate cost of Facebook taking forward these proposals. And Facebook, for its part, just essentially replied with what is mostly a reiteration of some of its previous statements. Facebook replied to this letter saying, "We believe people have the right to have a private conversation online,
yes,
wherever they are in the world. As the US and UK governments acknowledge, the Cloud Act allows for companies to provide available information when they receive legal, valid requests and does not require companies to build backdoors. We respect and support the role law enforcement has in keeping people safe. Ahead of our plans to bring more security and privacy to our messaging apps, we are consulting closely with child safety experts, governments, and technology companies, and devoting new teams and sophisticated technology so we can use all the information available to us to help keep people safe. End-to-end encryption already protects the messages of over 1 billion people every day. It is increasingly used across the communications industry and in many other important sectors of the economy. We strongly oppose government attempts to build backdoors because they would undermine the privacy and security of people everywhere."
And I would point out it's not just Facebook saying this. Edward Snowden today published an op-ed piece in The Guardian in which he said, "Without encryption, we will lose all privacy. This is our new battleground." He says if Barr's campaign is successful, the communications of billions will remain frozen in a state of permanent insecurity. Users will be vulnerable by design, and those communications will be vulnerable, and this is the important part, not only to investigators in the US, UK, and Australia, but also to the intelligence agencies of China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia, not to mention hackers around the world. I think Snowden got it right. If you don't trust Facebook's response, I think it's safe to say Edward Snowden knows a little bit about this.
Yeah, I mean, really, it boils down to, will you allow a third party to have access? And I mean, that's what it is. As you know, we've talked about the math. We've explained the math can do anything we want it to do. The question is, what do we want it to do? And as our listeners know, 5 years ago, when I first talked about Squirrel, I explained that what it was deliberately and explicitly a two-party solution. It's an authentication technology between you and the website that you are authenticating yourself to, without a third party. And the lack of a third party created huge complexities for me in its design. It's part of what took so long was I had to deal with all of the what ifs that would arise in a big where there's no one to have I forgot my password email recovery because there isn't. There's just the two of you and the site. So but the point is, it's a system, if we want it, for two parties. And the good news is it's not doing anything other than authentication, so it doesn't get into the crosshairs of our government in the same way. But this is the fun, exactly what Edward said, exactly what, this letter from Bill Barr and his UK and Australia
compadres
are saying. This is where we are. This is the battle. And the problem is, in the U.S. we have Congress, and the U.S. Congress is where laws originate. Our Congress is demonstrating that it's rather timid at the moment, more so than the UK. I wouldn't be surprised if something happens first in the UK, because they seem more willing to break things over
hasn't
there.
It already happened in Australia? Did they not pass that law at the beginning of the year? I thought they did. I don't know what its upshot is. I think everybody's ignoring it.
Yeah, exactly. Ignore it as long as you can.
They said by law you have to be able to provide a clear text version of any message. They didn't tell you how. Snowden says the true explanation for this is not about public safety, it's about power. End-to-end encryption gives control to individuals and devices they use, not to the companies and carriers that route them, and that means government surveillance would have to become more targeted and methodical instead of what their lazy, indiscriminate, universal surveillance. It's about power.
Yeah.
It's not, they always bring up the child pornography bugaboo.
Yeah.
But that's just an excuse, and they don't care about that. That's not what this is about. We should fight this. Fortunately, the math is out there.
Yep.
I don't know if there's any way they can, shut the math down. But, maybe you can't use Facebook. If you want privacy, why are you using Facebook anyway?
Right. Well, so ultimately that's what we pretty much know what's going to happen. There will end up being legislation, and then our major companies need to decide what they're going to do. I don't imagine that Apple and Facebook and Google can be outlaw organizations. And we talked about this. And so if somebody then wants secure encrypted communications, you'll use some other tool, some add-on, or some third-party solution.
We see Tim Cook having dinner with the president. We see Mark having dinner with all sorts of interesting characters. It's my guess these companies are already doing it. And anything they say in public, like that letter from Mark, is really a distraction.
And I've argued that Apple already can. If it wants to add another key to our iMessage conversations, we have no way of knowing that that's what's happened.
They may well have done that. We don't know.
Yep.
We don't know. And I think you'd be foolish to trust them. Can we trust Signal? It's open source, right? You can check the source code.
Yeah. Although I'm trying to remember, I think Signal does some automatic key management. That's the crux. As I've long said, if somebody else is managing your keys, then you're not managing your keys.
And it uses your phone number as the identifier, which is not good either.
Yeah. So, and in fact, we have been seeing lots of SIM attacks and attacks on two-factor authentication that way. It's why I gravitated toward Threema. Threema has the problem that it's not open
closed source, so you don't know what they're doing.
Exactly.
Somebody, Steve, needs to write completely open, encrypted end-to-end communication, technology.
And where the user manages their own keys.
It won't be easy to use. You'll be responsible, but that's
exactly.
Fine.
You're gonna have to have a trade-off between convenience and security. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, that's why Signal uses your phone number, because you can re-authenticate. At least they notify you if the key's been changed. But I think we need some. There must exist. There must exist.
And I think when we were talking about it, I'm trying to remember, is Signal and or WhatsApp, you are able to display the user's QR code of your key,
Yes.
and then physically like show them to each other and like pair them,
which is important because you need to verify. The one problem with WhatsApp is it doesn't let you know if the key's changed. Signal does. So unless that's changed recently, but for until the last time I saw WhatsApp, you can surreptitiously do a key change, which means somebody could impersonate you basically with that, and you could check for that, but most people wouldn't.
Yeah. So we have a really fun blast from the past after our second break.
Oh, I've been talking a lot. I'm sorry.
No, that's what we're here for.
I care so much about this subject, and
yeah, it's the big one.
Yeah.
It really is. It's what is going to happen with
I
this.
think Snowden's right. This is the last holdout, the last redoubt in the privacy battle. If you want privacy of any kind, if you don't want to be constantly surveilled 1984 style, you need end-to-end encryption, and you need to control it. Our show today brought to you by, you know what? I want everybody to go to IT Pro TV and learn about this stuff. Become an expert. Learn it, because this is a great way to do it. I mean, I know you already listen to Security Now, and I talk to so many IT professionals who say, this is where I get my education. But if you want to get into IT, or if you're in IT and you want to go a step further, IT Pro TV is a great way to learn. They have trainers who are both great at the subject matter. They're almost always professionals in the field, but they choose them on their ability to explain, to entertain. So it's a painless form of learning. Their IT learning is engaging and fun. They do it like we do in an interactive talk show format. They have a chat room. And man, if you wanted to pick one career that you would have a high-paying job in, it would be cybersecurity these days. You're listening to Security Now. You're halfway there. IT Pro TV is ready to help you and keep your team ready for any challenge in IT security. You can learn about the common tools, techniques, and practices people use to secure the environment, to do pen testing, to keep up on what's going on. And the nice thing about it, their online training is so convenient. It works on every platform you've got, not just iOS and Android, Windows and Mac, but on any browser, but Chrome OS too, absolutely. But you can also use it on your Roku or your Amazon TV or your Apple TV. They've got apps for every platform. They've got security courses on pen testing tools, crypto, malware detection, and more. You want to write the next great end-to-end user-controlled crypto app? Take their cryptography course. Look, IT changes all the time, and IT Pro TV wants you to stay ahead of the curve. That means you're going to get a great job. You're going to keep that job. You're going to get better jobs. You're going to be in demand. Your employer will love you. IT training courses go from studio web into web fast within 24 hours. So they're doing it live. You can watch it live today, but you can then watch it on demand tomorrow. And that means it's always fresh, always up to date. If you're new to the IT field, or if you are a seasoned pro, IT Pro TV's online IT training courses will change your life. And we know that because Steve and I both have talked to so many people whose lives have been changed by IT Pro TV. Get those certs, get that job, keep that job, get a better job, run your own business, become part of IT Pro TV's family. There are two memberships. There's the standard membership, which gives you all the video, the premium membership, which gives you the video, but also hands-on labs in an HTML5 browser. So you can set up Windows Server, Windows clients in the browser. And if you screw it up, which I always do, you close the tab. I love that. I really love that. But pretty soon you won't be screwing it up anymore. Practice tests too, so you can take the exam, the certification test before you take the real test. That's fantastic. Don't wait. Visit go.itpro.tv. Go.itpro.tv/security now. Please use that special URL. And don't forget the code SN30, SN30. That will give you 30% off for the lifetime of your active subscription. That's a great deal. It's already really affordable. Go.itpro.tv/security now. The code is SN30 for 30% off for the life of your active subscription. IT Pro TV. Build or expand your IT career and enjoy the journey. IT Pro TV. Back to you, Steve.
So, get a load of this, Leo.
Oh, boy.
Unix's co-creator, Ken Thompson's BSD Unix password has finally, after 39 years, been cracked.
Oh my God! You mean they couldn't log into his account?
No. So, and it was a pretty good password.
Well, I bet
So,
it
of course,
was.
Ken Thompson, who was, of course, the co-creator of Unix.
He's still alive, isn't he? I know Richie passed away. But
yes. Well, he's at Google, and he did Go, the Go programming language.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so the story begins 5 years ago when a developer, Leah Newkirchen, spotted an interesting etc. password file in a publicly available source tree of the historical BSD version 3 from 1980.
They left the password file in?
Yes, it was there. It included the hashed passwords belonging to more than 24 Unix luminaries who worked on Unix development, including Dennis Ritchie, Stephen Bourne, Ken Thompson, the Bourne Shell, Eric Schmidt,
who was an intern at Bell Labs when they were creating Unix. I love it.
The Eric Schmidt, Stuart Feldman, and Brian Kernighan.
Kernahan,
right.
Yes. Kernahan and Ritchie is the classic C book, yeah.
That's right.
Wow.
Since those early passwords were protected using the long since deprecated DES-based Descript, DES,
that should be crackable.
CRYPT, and they were limited to at most 8 input characters, Leah decided to brute force them for fun. This was 5 years ago.
I held in my hands, by the way. This was a board created
I
by
remember
Cryptography Research. This was a prototype. It actually failed. They only got one chip on it, but it was going to be filled with chips to crack DES.
Right.
This was all about, it says EFF, Cryptography Research, DES. They were going to prove that DES was unreliable.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right. And itself, it is a 56-bit block, which is now way too short. But that's why triple DES, essentially 3 of them, creates a much longer block. So anyway, 5 years ago, she started to tackle this. She successfully cracked the passwords for most of those Unix luminaries using standard off-the-shelf tools like John the Ripper and Hashcat. But the toughest ones to crack, which she was unable to crack, belonged to Ken Thompson and 5 other contributors who helped to build the Unix system,
Ken should be so proud.
Yes, including Bill Joy, who, of course, as we know, later founded Sun Microsystems and designed Java for us.
Wow.
So she wrote in a blog posting last Wednesday, she wrote, Ken's password eluded my cracking endeavor. An exhaustive search back in 2014 through all lowercase letters and digits took several days and yielded no result. She noted that compared to other password hashing schemes such as NTLM, Descript turns out to be quite a bit slower to crack. And the problem was there were no special case software for it. No one was like bothering, we can crack SHA 256 in a blink. But DES, just no one had bothered to special case it. So earlier this month, she posted all of her findings on the Unix Heritage Society mailing list, requesting help from other members to crack the remaining passwords. And 6 days later, an Australian engineer, Nigel Williams, responded with the plain text password used by Ken Thompson, which he cracked after 4 days using an AMD Radeon Vega 64 running Hashcat, which was producing or testing about 930 million hashes per second. Thompson's password, as consequently, has been revealed as
Monkey123. Oh, no.
P/Q2-Q4 exclamation point.
Huh. That's a chess move.
Exactly. Chess notation describing the move pawn from queens 2 to queens 4.
Oh, that's hysterical.
And
that's actually a good idea for making. I have to remember that for making passwords. It's good.
Withstood the test of time.
It's only 7 characters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But was 8 the max that you could do?
Yes, you could only do an 8-character max.
Okay.
So the next day, another mailing list member, Arthur Cruet, successfully cracked and provided the passwords for 4 more remaining uncracked hashes. Dennis Ritchie, who of course was the co-inventor of BSD and the creator of the C programming language, his was kind of simple: DMAC, D-M-A-C. Brian Kernighan's was /.comma/.comma.
That sounds like a shell command. At least a directory.
Stephen Bourne wasn't too concerned about security. His was Bourne.
Oh, dear.
B-O-U-R-N-E.
Oh, dear. Oh, dear.
Eric Schmidt, who, of course, is the former Google CEO, was Wendy, all lowercase and 3 exclamation points.
He was a dog even then.
And Stuart Feldman, who was the author of a Unix automation tool and the first Fortran compiler, Axolotl.
Which,
yes, which is that walking fish thing, AXOLOTL, which was
bad. That's a dictionary word. That's the only one in the bunch that's a dictionary word. So that's the worst one, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah, but anyway, Ken Thompson's was a tough one to crack, and it was a chess move.
Oh, you know what? /.comma/.comma. That's actually pretty bad too. If you look at the keyboard, it's the lower right. /.comma/.comma.
Three in a row backwards.
That's also a terrible password. Every hacker in the world probably has that in their crack set. Oh man, I like PQ2 to Q4.
That's pretty good.
And he gives it an exclamation mark, which means it's a brilliant move. So that's even better.
Pawn Queen 2 to Queen 4.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nobody would write it that way, but it's memorable. Apparently, like the Queen's Gambit. I love it.
So an interesting consequence, Leo, you'll get a kick out of this because it's about consumer high-resolution cameras. We're beginning to see consequences of this. We've covered the problem, for example, of just some keys being left out on the desk and how camera resolution is now so good and coupled with computational capabilities that a photograph of a key at a distance is enough to reproduce that key such that it will be able to open the lock. We've seen an instance of bouncing a laser off of a window to pick up the vibrations of the window panes, and in fact on this podcast we covered, and you may remember that the balloons, inflated balloons in a room, were the actual pictures of the balloons were used to pick up the conversation in the room
from the vibrations,
from the vibration of the rubber surface of the balloon, which I thought was very cool. Well, now we have a true story of a stalker locating a celebrity by examining the reflections picked up in her eyes' irises. A Japanese stalker confessed to stalking and unfortunately attacking a young Japanese pop star by zooming in on the reflections that he was able to detect in her eyes.
Oh my God.
In photos she posted on social media. After the assault, a 26-year-old man by the name of Sato was arrested and confessed to police that he'd used the star's selfies to figure out where she lived. Each of her pupils reflected the nearby streetscape, which he was able to plug into the street map function of Google Maps to locate matching bus stops and scenery.
That's horrible.
Isn't that
what a nightmare? That's straight out of Blade Runner.
he confessed to observing other reflections in Matsuoka's, I don't know how to pronounce her name, Matsuoka. Matsuoka's eyes. He curtains, windows, and the angle of the sun, which enabled him to guess which floor she lived on in the building. Wow. So isn't that something?
Center, enhance, zoom. Center, enhance, zoom. Wow.
Yep.
That's terrible. What kind of nut? Jeez.
I know.
Horrible.
But the information is there, which is like chilling. Elliot Higgins, the founder of investigation site Bellingcat, which has pioneered online investigative techniques, told the BBC that the better quality the image, the more potential there is for it to be used in geolocating us. He said, higher quality images allow for more details to be identified that can help with geolocation. And the more reference imagery there is from services like Google Street View, the greater the chance of determining a location. Even the tiniest details can reveal a lot of information about where a photograph is taken and information about the individuals in the photograph. And of course, as we know, the photo's EXIF data, which may include the GPS coordinates of a photo, can be used to do the same thing. And Google's computer vision specialists have worked to train deep learning machines to determine the location of almost any photo just by using its pixels and relying on image retrieval. Google has access to an extraordinary number of images on which to train its deep learning systems. So now we have one more thing to consider when posting photos online, and that is that subtle clues can exist.
Well, we know you shouldn't post pictures of your keys,
right?
Because you can, from a photo, duplicate a key. But I think back to Tech TV days. This was around 2000. One of our hosts used as her image a picture of her, headshot, but it was a topless picture of her that she had cropped down, and what she didn't realize was the image editor that she used to crop it didn't delete the thumbnail of the full image from the file. Oh. So somebody was able to get the full image and propagate. It was very embarrassing.
Wow.
These things happen all the time. And, you hear all the time about redacted documents.
Oh, exactly. Where you just take the black layer off.
So, times have moved fast,
Yeah, that is a reminder for people, by the way. If you black out areas on a PDF, print the resulting blacked out PDF to another PDF. Rather than just send the PDF with the blackouts, because those are removable.
So cracks me up.
Yeah. So Pew Research Center shared the results of their survey.
This was interesting. Yeah.
Yes, of Americans, I'll say, lack of understanding of technology-related security issues. They found, not surprisingly, that a majority of U.S. adults were able to answer fewer than half of the survey's digital knowledge quiz questions correctly. And frankly, I'm surprised that a broad swath of America did as well as they.
Well, some of these questions, like the last question, can you identify a picture of Jack Dorsey? They showed him a picture of Jack Dorsey.
Yeah, well, I would not.
Most people would fail that one. I have no idea. Not digital literacy. That's like digital gossip knowledge.
Yeah, I would have no idea.
So maybe it was the last question. Maybe just threw that in for fun. I don't know.
Yeah, they did note that people tended to say not sure rather than guess. So I thought that was kind of I'm a big fan of saying I don't know.
Yeah.
And so that was something. It was nice that was the case. So majority of U.S. adults were able to correctly answer questions about phishing scams and website cookies. I thought that was good, because there's been enough in the popular press, I think, about that stuff, and people talking about it at cocktail parties. Like, oh, do you flush your cookies? And I was like, my what? And then so then they go poke around their browser and find out about that. But other items were more challenging. For example, just 28% of adults were able to identify an example of two-factor authentication. Still, 1 out of 4? I think that's kind of good, actually.
You know what we don't know? I'd love to see the images. Apparently, they used a set of images and said, which of these is two-factor?
Oh, okay.
So, that Jack Dorsey question makes me cast the whole thing into doubt, to be honest.
Yeah, like was Pew appropriately qualified to even put a survey like this together?
Yeah.
For me, my own takeaway is, I guess what annoys me about these questions is that our moms should never have to know any of this stuff.
Do you know who this is, Steve? Do you know?
No idea.
That's Jack Dorsey. You see, you'd have failed. You'd have failed miserably.
Yeah.
By the way, I can see where you are by the reflection in your glasses. I just want to say.
In fact, you could probably read that screen from my eyeglass.
Yeah, I almost can.
Yeah.
But I do think it makes perfect sense that only a quarter of America knows what. I think they probably heard of two-factor. You don't need to know what it is to turn it on.
True, and you don't even have to know its name. That's a very good point.
Right.
It's like, it's that extra 6-digit thing I have to put in.
Right.
Yeah.
I would hope that would know to turn that on. And, of course, everybody listening to this show does. But tell your friends and family. I just wrote an article for the AARP magazine, the American Association for Retired People, old folk magazine.
Of which you and I are soon,
We both get it. I'm sure I get it. But on two-factor, explaining what it is and why you should use it. Because I think it is so important that people know this stuff. So, Pew's got a good point here. I'm not knocking their point.
No. But again, my take is that all of this is, in a sense, deeply abusive. One of their things was that, like, most people don't know what HTTPS:// is. It's like, oh my God!
Why should they?
Yes, why should anybody have ever been exposed to this?
Tim Berners-Lee, the guy who created the World Wide Web, has said, I never expected anybody to see HTTP://. This was for machine-readable purposes only. This is not supposed to be a human-readable.
Yes, and in fact, I've told the story of how a dear friend of mine who is about the least techie woman on the planet just thinks Google is the internet.
Yeah.
She puts it into the Google, and that's how she goes places.
Perfect.
She doesn't know that it's not that it's not the internet.
She's kind of right.
So, it was created by techies for techies, but of course most of the world are non-techies.
Right.
And when I was thinking about it, so I'm sort of, mulling this over. Remember back in the early days of automobiles, those darned horseless carriages were breaking down all the time. They were unreliable and finicky as hell. So, in fact, anyone driving one needed to also be a bit of an auto mechanic.
That's right.
And that was part of the fun, because those early autos were simple and understandable. And in fact, my own first car was a burgundy-colored Fiat 850 Spider. I completely took it apart in our garage and rebuilt it from the ground up.
Nice.
So, I knew and loved that car inside and out. And if something broke, I knew what and where I could go to get a part and fix it myself. But not anymore. The car I'm driving today is not, as they say, user serviceable.
Yeah.
But what it is in return for being a black box is it is incredibly reliable. I get in and I turn the key and it goes.
Yeah.
It does what it's supposed to do. And so my feeling is we're heading in that direction, but we're not there yet with today's computers. And I think that needs to be our target. These things should be black boxes. It's fine. They are becoming less and less comprehensible. As we were saying before, I look at the process monitor in my PC. I have no idea what that crap is. It's just filled up with stuff. It's all busy doing things. And it's like, okay, and they're not yet as reliable as we need them to be, but it's okay if they become opaque as long as they deliver reliability and security, very much like today's autos. And I know, Leo, you sort of live on the cutting edge of auto technology, so you may not be able to put the key in and drive off.
I don't have a keyhole.
That's even better. You just approach.
I just walk up to it. That was one thing I miss about the Tesla. There is no start button. You just put it in gear and go. Because you don't need a start button. What's that make any? What is that button for? Right?
You're right.
Let's go.
It was just servicing old school mentality.
It's exactly right. Yeah. If you put it in gear, it should just go. So,
you will be glad to know, Leo. Speaking of black boxes, OpenPGP will be built into Mozilla's Thunderbird email client.
Nice.
And it's the one I've settled on. When Eudora finally just got too long in the tooth, even for me, I tried a whole bunch of different clients, and I settled on Thunderbird, thinking, well, okay, I like Mozilla. It'll be kept up with standards. It'll be moving forward. Thunderbird currently has a third-party plugin, Enigmail. Enigmail.
It's kind of hard to use, yeah.
Yes, and it requires users to separately install additional third-party software like GNU PG or GPG for Win before installing Enigmail itself.
Right.
And unfortunately, currently, the licensing governing those libraries are incompatible with Thunderbird's MPL version 2 versus GPL version 3+. So the Thunderbird folks will need to find a compatible library, but they've formally announced they're going to, starting with Thunderbird 78, which I think we're on 65 or something right now. So it's scheduled for release next summer. So summer of 2020, OpenPGP will be built in and fully supported natively.
So you won't have to download a PGP tool or anything like that.
Anything.
That's really great.
Yeah,
that's really
just
great.
Be there.
I mean, I use Claus Mail on Windows, Mac, and Linux, and that supports PGP, but you have to have PGP installed. So, and it goes out and calls it, kind of like Enigmail would. So I think that's great. I hope they make it a very easy thing to do to generate and use a key.
Yep, and manage your key. I'm sure they will.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
And so we will definitely be talking about that when that happens next summer. I mean, and then, Leo, I'll have PGP. Woo!
PGP is, I mean, first of all, there are problems with it. It's very old. It's not how you would design it if you were going to design it today. But it's not like we have anything much else out there. So
right.
I use it mostly for signing to kind of verify that I created this.
Right, right.
Yeah. Cool.
So, a little bit of Windows 10 news. Windows 10's Tamper Protection is being enabled by default. And when you think about it, it really doesn't do much good to have Windows Defender watching the store if it can simply be turned off by sufficiently clever malware. And there have been increasing reports of exactly that happening recently. So yesterday, on the 14th, Microsoft announced that the new Windows 10 Tamper Protection security feature, which was added to Windows 10 in this most recent big update, 1903, also known as the May 2019 update, is now officially available for both enterprise and consumer users. Along with this announcement, Microsoft will be enabling this security feature on all Windows 10 devices, which need to have 1903 in them first, by default. When enabled, as it will be by default, Tamper Protection prevents Windows security and Windows Defender settings from being changed by programs, Windows command line tools, registry changes, or group policies. Basically, nothing programmatic can change it. The only way to configure it and or modify its settings will be directly through the Windows 10 user interface, or in the case of enterprise users, with some management software such as Intune. And before starting the podcast, I fired up this Windows 10 machine that I'm talking to you on, Leo, and it was there in the settings. It was off by default. So for what it's worth, any of our listeners who are interested, who are Windows Defender users, who did update to this most recent Win 10 1903, just can go into your update in security page under Windows Defender or whatever settings it's called. I won't bring it up because I don't want to pause. But anyway, it's obvious where it's there, and you'll find a switch, which is called Tamper Protection. Mine was off with a little yellow warning sign. I flipped it on and made it happy. And so now I've got it on, and it cannot be turned off. So says Microsoft, by any means other than doing it manually through the UI. So a nice little bit of forward motion on Microsoft's part for security. Two little bits of miscellany that under the sci-fi and fun category. Lori and I and my best friend saw Ad Astra.
Oh, I'm curious about that. Brad Pitt's new space opera. What'd you think?
Yes. I can't recommend it highly, as I was hoping I might. I described it here in the show notes as Brad Pitt wanders around through outer space.
That's what it looks like in the trailers too. Okay.
Yeah, it never gets much better than that.
Oh, that's terrible.
It was meant to be set in an interesting future. And as you know, as our listeners know, I am just steeped in sci-fi. And so it was an interesting take. There was no warp drive, there was no beaming. It was sort of like the reality moved forward another 100 years. So there was like a moon base and a Mars base, and we had some bases like further out in the solar system. No one was quite explained to us why, but there was a base out at Neptune that was doing some things, and it's like, okay. And so it was sort of like, and there was sort of a commercial. You could buy a ticket to go to the moon, and so it was just sort of an extension of where we are now, but no like exotic technology. So it required patience to go anywhere, and Brad was very patient, and the watcher of the movie was asked also to be very, very patient.
No, it does not bode well.
It's definitely a maybe, wait for it to come out on some free streaming service that you're already subscribed to, and get a big bag of popcorn.
Good tip.
Okay, now the fun piece is Friday. We got an extension to Breaking Bad.
I haven't seen it yet.
Wonderful.
This is El Camino.
2 hours. It is what happened to Jesse after he drove off at the end. The last scene of Breaking Bad was he had escaped / gotten out of his cage.
I wasn't clear at the end of Breaking Bad whether Jesse had survived.
In what mental state had he survived?
Right.
It's a little over 2 hours. It was written by, what's his name, Gilliam, who wrote the original, produced by, and of course, now I'm blanking on the actor's
Cranston.
name. Brian is in it.
Oh, he is?
Yes, there are some. They had so much fun. They went back and filled in some backstory that we weren't originally given in order to carry the storyline forward. So this is it's like the missing chapter. It's wait. the final closure that all Breaking Bad fans have been waiting for, and it will not disappoint you.
I'm so happy.
And this actor is so good. Holy crap. I mean, he is so good. So Aaron Paul, that's the name I was trying to remember.
Yeah, Jesse Pinkman, yeah.
Yes.
And Vince Gilligan is the author.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he wrote this.
He created it.
So I just wanted to make sure that all of our listeners who were Breaking Bad fans knew that Netflix did this 2-hour movie. It's not another series. It's a 2-hour final conclusion to what happened after Jesse drove off in his El Camino.
I have to say, I watched Better Call Saul. I mean, I'm such a Breaking Bad fan. I can't wait. I'm saving it because Lisa's in New York, so when she gets back, I look forward to it. Yeah,
do it.
Good.
It's got top recommendation. Ad Astra, no.
Yeah.
El Camino, all thumbs up.
Yeah.
And a Twitter follower of mine, certainly a follower of the podcast, tweeted to me a pointer to something that I was so thankful for. There are 2 documents produced by Google, Modern Password Security for Systems Designers, and a complementary Modern Password Security for End Users. And this was what to consider when building a password-based authentication system, written by Ian Maddox and Kyle Moschetto, who are Google Cloud Solutions architects. And there's a chunk on Squirrel.
All right.
So Google Cloud Solutions architects under alternatives to passwords for Squirrel, they wrote, the secure, quick, reliable login protocol is a recent addition to the security space. It is designed for end-user authentication to websites and applications. Squirrel users run a small client application on their modern password security for system. This looks like I've scrambled up. Run a small client application on their.
It looks like some.
Yeah, I mangled the text somehow when I did a copy and paste, or in their browser. Instead of giving servers a password that they must keep secret, the client provides a public key that is unique to the application or domain the user wants to authenticate to. The server provides a unique value to the client, and the client must then use their private key to sign and return that secret. The server verifies the signature by using their public key and authenticates the user. Most importantly, a compromised site or service cannot expose its users' credentials in a way that impacts any other site or service. So these guys got it perfectly. They said users can expect to see the option for Squirrel login to appear in more places in the coming years.
Right on.
Developers and software architects will appreciate the deep level of technical detail written with an eye toward an evolving security landscape and the way real humans interact with security controls. And that deep level of technical detail was a link in the PDF, in Google's PDF, to the Squirrel Explainer doc. So
right on. Bravo, Steve. Yeah. That's great.
Very cool. And thank you to Ian and Kyle for the inclusion of Squirrel in this official Google Cloud Solutions architects documents. So very, very cool.
That's really good. Yeah.
And Leo, time for our final break. And then we're going to look at what it means for all iOS devices from the iPhone 4S up through the iPhone 10 to have an unpatchable boot ROM exploit that means that all of those devices can now be jailbroken by anyone. Checkmate.
Let's talk about the Thinkst Canary, shall we? This is an amazing device. We started this show many moons ago talking about honeypots. The idea, in fact, Bill Cheswick, I had forgotten this, but we had Bill at our last pass event. You guys hit it off. He created an early honeypot. He had read Clifford Stoll's book about the cuckoo's nest, and there was a hacker. Oh, no, I guess he didn't have a hacker yet, but he created a honeypot to look like a vulnerable system. Got this hacker, he called him Burford, turned out to be a kid in England. He called his mom, and the kid stopped hacking. But this kid was going through the Bell Labs servers in this honeypot, attacking the rest of the world, and it was really an interesting story. Honeypots have been around that long, maybe several decades. But they've never been easier. Imagine having honeypots on your network, little devices you can configure in just a few minutes that will monitor and look for the kind of traffic that tells you someone bad is on your network. These are Thinkst Canaries, perfectly named. They're the canary in your coal mine network that will let you know something's up, something's wrong, and give you a chance to act on it. You know, hackers often are able to get into systems. How long were they in the Sony Pictures Entertainment System? Months. They were in the Marriott SPG guest booking system for 4 years before anybody noticed. That's how they got 500 million guest records. So that's what happens. They get in there, they wander around, they check out stuff, they learn stuff about your topology, they figure out where the valuable stuff is, and they have time to slowly exfiltrate whatever they want. Don't let them do that. Sprinkle a few canaries on your network, and you'll get a single high-quality alert when it matters most. This is the interface to my canary sitting right next to me. And actually, I just got some alerts, so I'm gonna check with Russell on this. What's nice is it rolls up these alerts into a single alert, so you're not barraged by stuff. But there were 14 host port scans. You see, this is after the power outage. Our canary was disconnected and then reconnected during the power outage situation. But here, somebody's been scanning. Now, you see it's called backup NAS because I made my canary look like a Synology backup NAS. But you don't have to. You can make it look like anything you want. Right now, it's a Synology NAS with SSH, FTP, a web server, and a port scan monitor and Windows File Share turned on. You can make a Christmas tree if you want, or you can lock it down. The key is these canaries don't look vulnerable. They look valuable. And so the bad guys get excited and say, look what I found. This is how you can configure the canary to look like anything you want it to. I've named it backup NAS. That's part of the deception, right? It's not a backup NAS. I've told it I want to look like a Synology NAS. And you can say, I want a bare canary with no services, a Christmas tree with all services. I can turn on Windows Server. I can turn on VMware. I can turn on Cisco routers. I can even make it look like a Rockwell Automation SCADA device or a Siemens CMatic 300. That is so awesome. I can tell it what MAC prefix to have, what IP stack fingerprint to give it. It looks like a Linux 4.4 device. This is the Mac of a Synology NAS. So it even has, it is completely an impersonation. You can even tell it what the HTTP looks like, the login page. Of course, I make it look like a Synology login. That's valuable because the bad guy is going to try to log in. And by looking at the user and the password he attempts, that's telling me something. For instance, if he uses a user that we know, that gives us some idea to where the bad guy got in. He already knows about that person. This thing is so great, so easy to configure, so fun to make it. And you see I put a little sales brochure in there. You might want to put in I like one of the things that the canary does is it lets you scatter something they call canary tokens, which are actually files. So I have a few canary tokens scattered around. They look just like files. One of them looks like a spreadsheet that's named what what did I call it? Payroll information, I think. Figuring, well, they might want that payroll information. And then I'll get an alert if somebody hits the file or somebody logs into the NAS. Many, many businesses use these. Because partly they're very well priced. Instead of one big upfront cost, you're licensing your canary annually, which is also nice because if anything happens to your canary, if it breaks during the year, they just send you another one. It's kind of like an internet appliance, except it's for security. Here's my little canary. You can kind of see it here. It's just a little box connected to our Ethernet network. The pricing allows you to try a couple, scatter them on your network, and then scale up as you want. There are small shops with 2 canaries. There are big banks with hundreds of them. They're deployed all over the world, all 7 continents. Some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley run them. In fact, you can read the love. They've collected love tweets at canary.tools/love and see what some of these people say, some of the big names. Look, you don't want to end up on the list. You don't want Steve to be announcing that your company is the latest victim of an advanced persistent threat. Go to canary.tools/twit. Just as an example of pricing, if you want 5 canaries, $7,500. You get your own hosted console, you get upgrades, you get support, you get maintenance for a full year. You can get fewer, you can get more. And the best part of this is we've got 10% off if you put TWIT in the How Did You Hear About Us box. And that's not just for this first year, that's forever. 10% off forever. And, of course, if you're not completely happy, you can always return your canaries. They have a 2-month money-back guarantee, full refund. So it's completely risk-free. I know you're going to love these. But just remember, the best canary is a quiet canary. If you don't hear anything from your canary, that means there's no one in your network. That's good. I just got, I'll show you these alerts. I'm going to check with Russell. Somebody's scanning. Somebody just scanned the port. And that's the IP address. It's an internal IP address, a 10-dot address. We've seen 14 incidents from this source. This is the kind of alert you get. I think this is great. Actually, this is from August 28th of last year. Oh, I know what this one is. That's the one I talked about before. Megan put a Western Digital NAS on the network, and it went out and scanned all our ports, so we immediately disconnected it. That's the kind of thing you want to know. So that's an old alert. There's no new alerts. Oh, whew. What a relief. I just sent Russell a note saying, what is this? He'll probably laugh. I hope he'll laugh. That's the beauty of it. When your canary says nothing, there's nothing to worry about. Canary.tools/twit. You need these on your network. This is absolutely a critical part of your network security plan. Canary.tools/twit. Put twit in the How Did You Hear About Us box. That way they know you heard it here. That's good for us. And you'll get 10% off for life. That's a big savings. We really love these guys. Canary.tools/twit. We're hearing from a lot of Security Now listeners who use the Canary boxes and are very, very happy. All right, let's talk about Checkmate. And we ain't talking PQ2 to Q4.
No. A recently discovered unpatchable iOS boot ROM exploit. 2 weeks ago, the iOS jailbreaking community received a welcome surprise when a security researcher who going by the handle Axiomics, AXI0MX, dropped what's been described as a game-changing, and I agree, new exploit affecting, well, pretty much all of Apple's mobile platform. He called it Checkmate. It's a boot ROM exploit, which is being widely proclaimed the most important single exploit ever released for iPhone, iPad, Apple TV, and Apple Watch devices. So, what does that mean for us? First of all, Checkmate will most likely, at least initially and directly, prove to be a massive boon for the security researchers who are wishing to peek under the hood of iOS devices despite Apple's every attempt to prevent that. The only real threat to end users might be that by allowing researchers and hackers to get in under the hood, it will almost certainly facilitate the discovery of other weaknesses, which are, as we know, all too possible since Apple is constantly patching the discoveries which occur. This is going to make those discoveries probably more likely. But for now, at least, Checkmate itself does not directly affect end users. If, for one thing, there's no remote execution path, an attacker cannot use Checkmate to compromise an untethered device, which means that anyone who wanted to use this exploit would need to physically have the device and have it tethered. Also, it does not allow any sort of threat actor to bypass a device's Touch ID or built-in existing PIN protections. In other words, it does not permit any compromise of the secure enclave which exists in these devices. So the user's personal data continues to remain safe from attackers who are lacking the device's unlock credentials. That is notwithstanding the possibility of there being other 0 days that are not known. But this is in itself a testament to Apple's multi-layered security design philosophy. The idea that even a full boot compromise, which is what Checkmate enables, would still leave the user's private data secure should be comforting to all Apple device users. And there's no persistence mechanism. If an attacker were to gain physical access to an affected device and use the boot ROM exploit to compromise that device, rebooting the device would restore its normal boot chain security, and any changes that the attacker may have made in RAM would be lost, as Apple's security checks which would then again be effective, would either delete any files modified by the attacker or would refuse to run them. So, okay, which devices? As I mentioned before, only the most recent devices are immune because Apple did discover this summer before last. So the most recent devices, an iPhone XR, XS, XS Max, or any iPhone 11 series, all of which use the A12 Bionic or later chip, the A13, that boot ROM exploit will not work because Apple did find it. There is a use after free vulnerability, which Axiomics found, which appears only in devices using the A11 chips or earlier. So that's from the iPhone 4S, which uses the A5 chip, all the way through the iPhone 8 and X models, as well as any iPad, Apple TV, or Apple Watch using A11 or earlier chips. But on the other hand, think about that. I mean, that's most generations of iPhones and iPads which are vulnerable.
Now, how vulnerable is vulnerable, though? I mean, a jailbreak nominally means you can use some store besides Apple's store. Is this really like rooting the phone more, or?
So yes. So what it means is that researchers and hackers will be able to get in and look around. They'll be able to dump these files that Apple has protected and reverse engineer them.
But they'd have to get physical access to your phone to do it.
Well, so that's the point. I don't think people care about our phones. They care about Apple's code. So this
is more bad for Apple than it is for us.
Oh my God, it is horrible for Apple.
I get it.
Yes.
Okay.
So on September 11th, 2 weeks ago, Axiomics tweeted. This is the fifth in a series of his tweets. I have it on in the show notes. He said, during iOS 12 betas in summer of 2018, Apple patched a critical use after free vulnerability in iBoot USB code. This vulnerability can only be triggered over USB and requires physical access. It cannot be exploited remotely. He says, I am sure many researchers have seen that patch. So what has happened now is on GitHub is the full exploit of this use after free vulnerability, which Apple fixed last summer. So what does it mean for end users? Nothing. Apple is definitely not happy, whereas researchers and hackers are dancing a jig. But that said, if a paranoid person, or perhaps someone who might be explicitly targeted, wants some takeaways from this, the only risk would be if their device were outside of their control. In such a case, it would be possible for the phone to be jailbreaken and for transient surveillance malware to be loaded into the phone.
Right.
So if you've left your phone unattended and powered on in your, whatever, a hotel room or on a desk in a shared office environment or whatever, or if, for example, if it was temporarily confiscated by border security guards while you were traveling into China, you might consider rebooting the iOS device once it's back in your possession, and you should do like a force restart to ensure that malware hasn't found a way of simulating a fake reboot. So do a full deep restart. That will reestablish the secure boot chain, and you'll be okay. We've previously talked about the way secure boot chains work. I have a graphic here on page 14 of the show notes, which is from Apple's 2016 Worldwide Developer Conference presentation, showing the concept of the flow of the secure boot chain from power on of an uncompromised device, where the boot ROM, which is actually a ROM, gets control of the processor. It then looks up at the low-level bootloader with the so-called LLB, and before it loads it and transfers control, it verifies Apple's signature. And if the signature verifies, then it loads it and transfers control. It then does its low-level bootloader work, beginning to initialize and set up the hardware, and then it wants to transfer control to iBoot. Before it does that, it goes out and similarly verifies the Apple signature on that code, which nobody knows how, thanks to a cryptographic signature, nobody knows how to spoof that. That cannot be modified from the time Apple has done it. And then it loads it and transfers control to it. iBoot does the same thing for the kernel. So it brings the kernel in, verifies the signature, gets the kernel going. The kernel does the same thing for iOS, verifies the iOS signature, loads it, and gets it going. So each step of that startup process verifies the signature, the digital signature signed only by Apple using a super secret private key that doesn't exist in the device, never exists outside of Apple, in order to literally bootstrap itself one module successively after another until it's up. What makes the Checkmate so devastating is that it exploits a flaw which exists in the ROM that nothing can patch. Apple can't go back and fix it. It would require a factory recall of a physical recall of those devices because it's in the ROM. So it intercepts it before the first signature check, which essentially allows the entire boot chain to be intercepted and all of that code to be studied, reverse engineered, dumped out. And Apple now, all of these devices that are the more recent A11 and A10 devices, they're still receiving updates, right? From Apple. That means that the instant an update is released, it can now be fully reverse engineered, analyzed, and compared against the previous version, which will allow both security researchers but also bad guys to figure out what Apple has changed, what it is exactly that Apple fixed. And if they're able to get an exploit out into the wild before a targeted device has been updated, they could take advantage of that. So, Apple is famously, rather quiet about their security updates. We've often talked about how, Apple just says, oh, we fixed this and this and this, but with no details. Well, it hasn't been possible until now to easily get those details. Now, any device, the instant it is updated, can be jailbroken through this publicly disclosed and unfixable boot ROM exploit in order to crack the device open, allow all the updated files to be dumped and analyzed. So we probably are entering a new era in Apple device security. As we know, they announced that they would be they recently announced they would be making some selected special iPhones or iOS devices available to a few hand-picked researchers who wish to explore iOS for bugs and security flaws. Well, that's no longer necessary. The entire world has that level of access now, and Apple has no choice but to continue supporting these devices which are vulnerable to this boot time bug. So it isn't the end it's not directly a problem for iOS end users, but it really does change the security landscape for Apple so long as devices that are part of this that are still being updated and have this unpatchable boot ROM flaw are out in the world.
Now, it doesn't persist, but it's enough to get something else on your phone that would persist, like a spy program or that kind of thing.
Correct, until it's rebooted. So,
right.
If you lost physical control, you can imagine. I mean, imagine that the guys at
when you come into the United States and they take your phone and they go into another room.
Yep.
This happens all the time, not just entering the border. If you're arrested, they take your phone, lock you up, modify your phone, give it back to you, say, thanks, sorry, send you on your way. And
celebrate the guys who do the iPhone jailbreaking.
They know about this, right?
They'll jump on this in a heartbeat. Yeah. And so it does mean that the world of jailbreaking, like being a problem, it's just not anymore.
Right.
On the A12 and A13 devices, Apple fixed this.
So the real risk to an end user would be if somebody got your phone, took it away, they'd hack it with this thing, jailbreak it, which allowed them to sideload a surveillance app.
Yes. They
could even reboot it, which would unjailbreak it, but the surveillance app would still be there and give it back to you.
Correct. So that's the direct effect of physical access to your device.
Right.
The secondary effect is this makes bugs way easier to find, and it makes Apple's changes easy to reverse engineer. We know, because we are talking about it all the time, the instant Windows the instant Microsoft releases an update, the old version of the DLL is compared against the new version. What it is they changed is found, and an exploit exists within hours of Windows release. We're talking about this all the time. Apple hasn't been exposed to that because they've been able to lock down their platform to a degree that Microsoft inherently can't. That just changed. Apple can no longer lock down their platform. It is going to be open for anyone to reverse engineer any changes Apple makes to devices which are necessarily still being supported and are receiving updates.
Even iOS 13, you could look into that and see what they're doing on the newest iOS, what new updates do.
On the older device.
But you have to have an older device, yeah.
I have an iPhone 10. I can do it on mine if I cared.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. It's a game changer.
I had no idea. I mean, we talked about it, but I didn't realize the real risk was this risk to Apple more than to end users.
Yeah, I think so. You know, Apple has enjoyed being coy, and they've been able to because they've had complete control of the boot chain, and they just lost control.
This is why we need Steve Gibson in the world, and Security Now is your must-listen-to podcast every week. Thank you, Steve. We do Security Now Tuesdays about 1:30 Pacific, sometimes later because it's a long day. 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern, 20:30 UTC. There we go. I got all the times right. You can watch live at twit.tv/live. If you do that, join us in the chat room, irc.twit.tv. Those are the kids talking about the show behind the scenes as we record it. But there's also a great place to go now to talk about the show after we deliver it, because it is a podcast. That's our new forums at twit.community. Check it out, twit.community. Steve has 16 kilobit audio versions of this show, 64 kilobit audio, plus unique to his site, he's got the transcripts. That's at grc.com. While you're there, pick up a copy of SpinRite, the world's best hard drive maintenance and recovery utility. He didn't talk about it, but I will. There's also lots of other great free stuff there, including Shields Up and lots of information about Squirrel. grc.com. You want to ask Steve a question or talk at him, you can do that on Twitter at SGGRC. He accepts DMs at SGGRC. It's also a great place to follow Steve. The show notes go up there ahead of time, and anything he finds out during the week, he tweets at SGGRC. Our website for the show, twit.tv/SN. You can get every episode ever recorded there, all, 736 now. You can also subscribe. In fact, that's the best thing to do. Get your complete set. Just subscribe in your favorite podcast application, and it will be delivered to you the minute it's done. But now we are done. Thank you, Steve. I will not be here next week.
Oh, your cruise begins. Your cruise begins.
My vacation.
It's only 2 weeks you're missing, not 3?
I'm missing a lot. I'll be back. I will be back November 20th, I think. The first Tuesday. We get back November 15th, the first Tuesday
you're
after
missing
that.
several
I'm
weeks.
missing quite a few. I'm sorry. What can I say? It's vacation. I apologize. I won't be here. I'm not sure who's handling the show. I'm guessing it's Jason Howell. He's my usual fill-in. But, of course, we tune in not for me, but for Steve. So he'll be here, right?
I'll be here. I never go anywhere.
I know.
Well, okay, not quite never.
That's changing, isn't it? That's changing.
Not quite never, but I strongly resist.
I got some bad news / good news for you. LastPass enjoyed our visit to Boston so much they want to do 2 more events next year. I'm not sure where they'll be. They don't have to be with Steve, but I'm thinking they probably ought to be. Anyway, I'll fill you in on that down the road.
Sounds good.
Yeah, we had a good time, didn't we?
We did, and I will commit now.
Oh, wow. You just made somebody at LastPass very, very happy. Thank you, Steve. We'll see you next time on Security Now.
Thanks, Leo.
Security Now.